Okay, so it's this idea of feeding our brains good stuff that we want to jump inside of and grab hold of, and we thought maybe we'd create a memory that would help you remember all of that. As I said last week, this series really comes from a personal place because about 10 years ago, when I started following Jesus and when I got married, those two things combined, with the powers of the universe combined, were very effective in the Lord pointing out to me that I had an attitude problem, that I have this ability to focus on and fixate on that which is broken or displeasing or imperfect or basically a part of this world, right? And really what came out of that process was that it's a problem. Because I can use this skill, this deconstructive, bad attitude, critical skill, I can use it on people, both those that I know and those that I don't. I can use it on organizations, both those that I eat at or visit or those that I don't. In areas where I have skill and frankly areas where I don't. Anybody relate? I just have this incredible ability to deconstruct everything, and if I could just make my living deconstructing, it would be a wonderful world for me. Anyway, what I realized in that process was that it's miserable, and it took someone who was really healthy in their walk with the Lord and I suppose had enough relational credibility with me to just kind of call me on it and go, it's unhealthy. It's relationally unhealthy because it's not fun to be in a relationship with someone like that, because you can't be in a relationship with someone like that because they devour you as quickly as they devour things and themselves. It's unhealthy between you and the Lord because he doesn't call you to live that way. It's unhealthy because no circumstance is ever going to be perfect, and thus you'll find contentment entirely impossible. It's unhealthy because it breeds self-hatred. And Jesus didn't die on the cross so that we could hate ourselves. And so I guess this series... I guess it's for those of you that can relate to all of that, and if you can't, then I think the first Sunday in December, we'll go somewhere else. If you don't relate to any of this, not that you're not welcome. Anyway, that was a bad joke. I guess it's for those of you that can relate, and you're sick of your attitude. You're sick of the perpetual negativity, and you're recognizing a pattern in your life that it doesn't matter what's going on. The situation can never be perfect enough. And it doesn't matter your occupation. It doesn't matter your financial place. It doesn't matter your relational status. It doesn't matter what you drive. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have or don't have. It doesn't matter how much you weigh or what you look like or how young you are or how old you are or what your standing in the company is. Maybe you're just aware of the fact that you have this perpetual ability to be unhappy. And I guess this series is about opening up the scriptures and going, wait a minute. Like the gospel... And Jesus, he invites us into a different way, a way that hovers above circumstances, but it involves discipline, it involves skill, and particularly this morning what we're going to talk about is it involves feeding your brain good stuff. And on that note, there's a story about a guy named Louis Zapparini that I think can help us get inside of what does that mean to feed our brains good stuff. Louis is in his 80s now, but as a young man, he grew up with a sister and a brother, if I recall correctly, and they had the type of dynamic where he had all the bad ideas and his brother got in all the trouble. Very mischievous youths, you might say, but in his early teens, he figured out that he was pretty athletic, and in particular, he figured out he was a very good runner. And so Louis, on into high school, became a very talented, very gifted, very competitive runner, particularly on the distance realm. In fact, so much so that on a whim, he began to train for the mile in the Olympics and in fact made the team and competed in the 1936 Olympics, which were held where? Berlin. In fact, when he ran in the gold medal race, he was not naive. He realized that he was too early in his training for the mile to actually place in the medals there. But he did have a hunch that he could get there. And in fact, while he was getting killed in the race, in the third lap he decided that he was going to kick it up to the notch that he felt maybe he was capable of kicking it up to for 4 laps, and in the final lap he ran with such a pace that he got the attention of everyone in the stands, including Adolf Hitler. I mean, so much did he gain ground that Adolf Hitler insisted on the opportunity to meet Louis, and in fact after the race was able to meet Louis, and to which Louis said he had a very limp handshake, and he just kind of said well, you're the runner or something. Louis came home from there with a full-ride scholarship to the University of Southern California. He had designs on competing in the mile in the 1940 Olympics and had designs on placing in the medals there. But as you know, the 1940 Olympics never happened because there was a war that was going on. And as is the case with many young men from that generation, he did what many of them did, and he joined the military, he joined the army, and was very quickly assigned to the role of a bombardier. This is when essentially the Army and the Air Force were still one. He was made a bombardier on a B-24, which if you know anything about World War II history, like that was a death sentence. I mean, being on a bomber was a death sentence. Being on a B-24 Liberator was especially the case. That thing was a terrible airplane. He eventually was assigned to the Pacific Theater, and in 1942 was stationed on some obscure island and had several successful bombing runs with his crew, so much so that he developed the reputation of Lucky Louie, because he survived things that many people didn't. He survived these harrowing different bombing raids. At one point in his time there, his plane was damaged enough that it was out of service, and he and his crew were enjoying some days off when the commanding officer approached him and said that they were going to go on a run to search for a downed crew somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. They felt like somewhere near Hawaii. Now, this was puzzling to Louis because he knew that the airplane was damaged. He knew that they were kind of not operating right now. And so when they inquired what are they going to fly, the commanding officer said the Green Hornet. Now, the Green Hornet was the ugly duckling of the fleet. And everyone knew it. It had been robbed for parts repeatedly. It was thought to not even be able to fly, and certainly no one should fly it, but this was war. He was a commanding officer. They had no choice. So they loaded that plane, and another crew loaded their plane, and the plan was for them to fly together to Hawaii and search for these downed crewmen. But en route, they weren't in the air very long. Pink, blue. Sorry about the stage lighting. I'm trying to stay over here, but me and not facing doesn't work. They fell behind very quickly as they were trying to fly together. So much so that Louis' pilot just radioed the plane ahead of them and said, "You just keep going. We'll catch up to you. This is ridiculous." It wasn't long after that, but long enough that there was space in between them, that the two engines on the left wing went out. They were flying 800 feet off the water. They were searching for a downed crew, and so you don't have to be an expert in aviation to understand how that translates. And Louis said they very quickly found themselves crashing into the water. Louis himself was entangled in the wires. His seat that he was to occupy in a crash was right by kind of the electrical brain, I suppose, of the airplane. He remembers being entangled in the wires and feeling himself going deeper and deeper into the ocean, feeling the pressure build, eventually passed out and resigned himself to death prior to doing so. And then in his words, kind of miraculously woke up, was no longer entangled in the wires, got free of the airplane and was making his way to the surface, which he said took forever, all the while swallowing blood and oil and gasoline as he's making his way to the surface. When he got to the surface, he started puking profusely, of course. All about visuals here at Narrate Church. And then he spotted on the water with him two of his comrades, his dear friend, the pilot, and the tail gunner. He then saw a raft, and being in peak physical condition because he continued to train though he was in the Army, he swam to the raft, retrieved the raft, understood that the raft was his key to survival, and so got the raft and then made his way over to the two guys. So they ended up in this raft. Provisions were enough dark chocolate to last them 4 days. Don't know why. Enough water to last them a few days if they just drank in the morning and in the evening, some fish hooks, some fishing wire, a mirror, some powder you'd put in the water, basically nothing that would really keep you alive on the open ocean for very long. About an hour after crashing, the tail gunner panicked, had a full-on panic attack, started screaming, "We're all going to die." Louis at that point said the thought had never crossed his mind that they might die. They calmed him down, they went to bed that night, or they went to sleep that night, and in the middle of the night, the tail gunner, the guy that had panicked earlier, he ate all the chocolate. It was Valentine's Day, so we thought I got to celebrate. Just kidding. But he ate all the chocolate. They woke up in the morning and found that out, of course. And they, what do you do? They figured they had a few days to be out there. Next evening, something started thudding the bottom of their raft. They just feel this thing pounding the bottom of their raft. They very quickly determined that it was a large shark. They gave orders to not talk or move. That shark continued with them for a couple days. Finally, it went away, but after it went away, it wasn't long after that sharks returned, and for the rest of their journey on the water, they would have these medium-sized sharks just circling their raft, sometimes dozens of them, just circling. They could see their fins and the surface, just like a bad movie. Then the rescue plane came. They saw it on the horizon. This is like day 4 or day 5, I don't recall exactly, and they could see it on the horizon. Louis said they came to tears. They were so excited. They did what they were supposed to do. They got their mirror, they got their powder in the water, they drew all the attention they could to themselves, and for quite a time they just watched the plane fly back and forth on the horizon and then leave. And it was then that they realized that this was probably long-term. What do they eat, you might ask? Well, they did figure out a way. They didn't have anything to cover their head with. So if you've ever been on the lake and forgot to wear sunscreen for a few hours, imagine what it's like after a few days, or, in all they were on the water for 47 days. But after just a few, their faces were so scorched that their bottom lip touched their chin and their top lip touched the bottom of their nose. But they did figure out, they had this little piece of canvas that they'd put on their head, and they'd take turns, if I recall correctly, just kind of shading themselves just a little bit. And at one point, an albatross landed on Louis's head. He reached up and grabbed it by the legs and wrung its neck and immediately started pulling the feathers out with his teeth. But that was after his beard had been growing for a while, and he felt the worm, or whatever it was, the bug start crawling in his facial hair. They said he thrust his torso into the water despite the sharks, and so his buddies were beating sharks away while he is, on a full-on freak-out panic attack like all of us would be, like there's bugs in my beard. But eventually other birds every once in a while would land on their head, and they would kill it and eat this raw bird. They figured out ways to catch rainwater when they went through storms. Louis he figured out that he could take fishing hooks and tie them to his fingers, and that there was these fish that followed the sharks around, and if he timed it just right, he could reach in there and grab one and hook it, and then they'd eat the fish, though eventually they'd lost all their hooks because when you miss, you lose the hook. On another occasion, he got sick of the fact that he said, if the sharks are going to try to eat me, I'm going to try to eat them. And so he figured out this plan. His buddies thought he was crazy, where he would grab the small sharks by the tail and flip them onto the raft, and then his buddy, the pilot, would take this long screwdriver type thing. Don't know why you give somebody like no food but a screwdriver on a raft. Doesn't make sense to me either. It's made of rubber. But they'd take this screwdriver, he said, and shove it into his eyeball, and it would kill him instantly because it would hit his brain. And then Louis understood from his survival training that you can't eat a shark if the meat hasn't been treated, because apparently sharks filter their meat with their urine through their body. Our fish biologist is shaking his head. That is disgusting. But you could eat the liver. He took the mirror and made it jagged and scratched himself inside the shark, and they would eat raw shark liver. How's that for appetizing? 20 or so days into the trip, they saw another airplane. Once again, they did everything they could to draw its attention, draw it to them, and they did. And when they looked up and they saw the big red circle on the bottom of the wing, they knew they had done bad. They realized it was a Japanese bomber, and though international war laws made it illegal for them to open fire on these guys in these situations, they didn't hesitate. So they strafed them. Louis would dive into the water. He'd see the plane coming, knowing that it was going to strafe them. He dove into the water. His buddies were too weak. They just folded up in the fetal position. He said he knew that a bullet is only lethal for the first 4 feet. So he'd get 4 feet under. He had this, part of his deal as a child was he learned how to hold his breath forever. Comes with the running lungs, I suppose. And so literally he said he would be 4 feet under the water, punching sharks in the nose, watching bullets hit the water, and then when it settled down, he'd go to the surface, catch his breath. That went on for 45 minutes. His buddy, the tail gunner, wasn't doing well, and progressively was getting worse and worse, which is interesting because they were all sharing food and water equally. Louis says even when it became clear that he wasn't going to make it, they made the determination that A, they weren't going to do cannibalism, and B, they weren't going to cut him off from the rations. It was all equal parts the whole time. And about a week before they eventually saw land, his buddy died. In fact, he asked Louis in the middle of the night, "You think I'm going to die?" And he said, "Yeah, I think you're going to die." They slipped him into the water, and this is a weird fact, but the sharks didn't bother with him. Louis weighed 140 pounds the day before the crash. He weighed 72 when he was eventually became a POW. Because what happened was on day 47 they saw land. Turns out it was the Marshall Islands. They drifted over 2,000 miles west, and not long after seeing land, they saw a Japanese ship, and they became POWs and would spend the rest of the war as POWs, eventually in Japan. Now, on this question, okay, help me with my attitude, because I got an attitude problem. And even further, I think if you're going to go so far as to go, I think Jesus and God and the Scriptures can help me with my attitude problem. I think Louis can help us tremendously. And here's how. Early in the process, Louis understood that the biggest threat to his life was losing his mind. He understood that the worst thing that could happen was if he lost his mental awareness. He'd seen it in action while he was in the Pacific. He understood that it didn't even take a full day to lose your mind while trapped on the open ocean. He'd heard stories. He had been a part of rescuing guys who had been out there for just a couple of days and saw stuff that frankly wasn't there. And so he made the determination, like I said, he sincerely never considered that he was going to die for those full 47 days, he says after the fact. He made the decision that he was going to keep his mind in shape. And so they essentially started playing Trivial Pursuit. They would quiz each other on, because they didn't have books, right? They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have any number of the things we can do to feed our minds today. They just started quizzing each other. Mother's maiden name, birthdays, jobs, first girlfriends. I mean, everything they could think of, they would just quiz each other. The other thing that they started to do, and it was Louis' idea, he started cooking them meals. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In fact, Louis jokingly says in an interview that I watched this week that the guys got greedy and they eventually wanted him to start cooking brunch too. Because what he would do is he would describe the making of the meal. The smells, the sights, the sensations. He would describe every detail of making it from scratch, of putting it in the oven or cooking it on the stove, of setting the table. They would eat it. And he and his buddy, the pilot, they would go through the process of eating the meal together. And then they'd go through the process of cleaning it up and putting it away. And then at brunch, which is like now, right? I mean, they would do it again. And they would do that several times a day, every day. Here's what's interesting. In my view, the tail gunner, he ate the same amount of food. He drank the same amount of water. He lived in the same conditions. He, in fact, you could argue, was in better shape when the crash happened than were any of the other two, especially the pilot, because he was wounded pretty good. But from day one, he refused to play the games. He wouldn't participate in Trivial Pursuit. He wouldn't eat the meals. He sat there sulking, if you will, non-participatory, not feeding his mind. And it's precisely what Louis watched happen. He slowly lost truth, not just with reality or touch with not just reality. His body slowly shut down. I think Louis touches on something that is very central to the text. It's something that we see Paul talking to the Israelites about, and if you want to, we talked about that last week. You're welcome to grab the podcast. It's something we see Paul talking to the Philippians about. In Philippians 1, just to give you some context, Philippians is a book written from prison by a guy who's going to die in prison and probably understood he was going to die in prison to a group of people he hasn't seen for 10 years. Now, what we know about Paul and his situation was, if you've read the book of Acts, Paul wanted to share the gospel with Caesar. He was that big, audacious, kind of bold type of guy who he wanted the gospel to get to Caesar. And so early in the process, while he was getting persecuted by Rome and by Jews, the legal terminology in the day was he appealed to Caesar. Something he could only do because he was a Roman citizen. He could say, I appeal to Caesar, and suddenly the system shut down, and he got the right to go before Caesar and stand trial. In fact, you read in the book of Acts where guys go like, man, if you just stop appealing to Caesar, we don't have anything to hold against him. He's in prison waiting for his chance to appeal to Caesar. And he says this to the Philippians. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, I just want you to pay attention to his attitude. A man who's in prison. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. He is not naive to his situation and to what people are trying to do to him, and yet he finds the positive in it. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of all this I rejoice. Yes, I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will always have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. And now here's his famous line. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Now understand that in our culture, there's a whole section at Hastings, self-help and positivity and all this stuff. And I understand sometimes it's about sticking your head in the soil and just thinking positive thoughts. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. What the Bible does seem to indicate is there are things you can do. I mean, there's hope in Christ, yes, and that is over everything, yes, but there are things you can do, which raises the question, what did Paul do? In fact, I get the argument that there's things you can do from Paul, because look at Philippians 4:8. You can ask the question, how did Paul pull this off? I think he tips his hand. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Last week I challenged you to memorize a verse from earlier in Philippians. do everything without arguing and complaining. This week, the ushers are going to give you the opportunity to memorize Philippians 4:8. They'll hand you that as you go. It seems to me that Paul understood something that Louis understood. He understood something that military trainers understand, per Louis. He understood something that God was trying to tell the Israelites, and that is, you want a good attitude? Well, then feed your mind good stuff. He says something very similar in Galatians 6. He says, do not be deceived. It's one of my favorite section of Scripture in the whole Bible. God cannot be mocked. People reap what they sow. There is a law of cause and effect, he's saying. Those who sow to please what their sinful nature, please to sow their sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. Those who please to sow the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. What if Paul is saying this is true mentally? You want a good attitude? Think positive thoughts. You want to know how I'm maintaining this perspective while rotting in prison? Well, because I can't read books and I can't listen to podcasts and there's lots of things I can't do that would feed my brain, but I can force my brain to think about the good stuff. Call it mental manipulation if you want. I can dwell on the stuff I can control. I can dwell on the positive stuff. Tim Sanders, in a book called Today We Are Rich, which is the book that essentially what happened this summer was I read Tim Sanders' book, and it helped me to realize that over the course of the last 10 years, there's been these exercises that I've learned, and it put into words some things for me and really made this series possible. That book's up there. You can grab it later. But he says this: what comes out of your mind is what you put in your mind. You feed your mind like you feed your body. Which sounds a lot like what our Rabbi Jesus said when he says good people bring good things out of the good stored up in their heart, and evil people bring evil things out of the evil stored up in their heart. For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. See, we understand this principle physically, don't we? We understand, let's just talk about these. Are you a sweets person or a salts person? Sweets? Salt? Both? That's cheating. I was reminded this week, I went home one day and made myself lunch and stole one of the boys' lunch, things of potato chips, and I took the original Lay's fresh bag. I was reminded that no one can eat just one, right? Because I, especially a fresh bag cracked, couldn't you eat those for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day? Or maybe Reese's are your thing. Couldn't you eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day? I mean, there's junk food, right, that tastes good. It satiates us, supposedly. There's this stuff that's designed to, get our attention. We enjoy it. But I have something. You have something. It's called a nutritional IQ, right? I understand that there are long-term effects to my choosing Lay's potato chips for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. I understand that it'll affect the length of my life. I understand probably even more than that because I'm shallow enough to go I'm just really worried about my quality of life now. I understand that at a meeting at 3 o'clock, I won't be as sharp if I have the fries instead of the salad. I think mentally we get this stuff. What if what Paul is saying here is your mind has an appetite, and you can satiate that appetite, you can feed that appetite with junk food, or you can feed it with good stuff. Your choice. You can feed it with gossip, you can feed it with complaining, you can talk about how you don't like the weather. Funny thing is, you don't like the weather in any season. You can feed it with whatever you want to feed it with, and guess what? I gave you a body, physiology is my idea, science is mine. You're going to have an attitude that reflects what you think about. And that's not a spiritual thing, well it is, but it's a cause and effect thing. It's a reap when you sow thing. Or you can feed on good stuff. You can consume stuff that actually causes you to focus on that which is life-giving, that which is optimistic, that which where you do have control, that what you do have to be thankful for. Which is why one of the common themes of the Bible is be grateful always, right? It's this invitation to steer our minds because it too has an appetite. Listen to the way the message reads or Philippians 4:8 reads in the Message. Sum it all up, friends. I'd say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Oftentimes those of us that hang out in church, we have a bad habit of believing that there's a God who will just wave a wand and fix all of our problems. And sometimes that feels like the Christian thing to do. Like psychiatry and all that stuff, that's for people that don't believe. We believe in a God who will just fix your problems for you. That's not the Bible, the God of the Bible that I see. I see a God who says, beat your body and make it your slave. A God who says your body is central to your spiritual growth. And all that to me says, you want a good attitude? You want to enjoy your marriage? You want to enjoy your house? You want to find something enjoyable about your job? You want to move forward with optimism, not negativity? Well, then feed your mind accordingly. Because that's the way this world that I've made works. It seems like one of the questions that we can ask is, like, what's on my mental palate? What do I consume? In fact, Tim Sanders suggests in the book that you keep a mental diary. He says, if you don't buy this, spend a week journaling, just like you would if you were going to get in a weight loss program or something, or get in shape for something. Journal everything you take in mentally. And at the end of the week, he says, analyze it. And I guarantee you'll see a corresponding relationship. Hang out with complainers, you'll become one. Read negative stuff, you'll become negative. Now, I think there's three paths that we can choose here. And I think I'm sensitive to this because of some of my spiritual background. One is we can get really, really legalistic. And we can create a path. Some would call it legalistic, some would call it righteous, some would call it conservative. I don't know. There's all kinds of terms, some more unfortunate than others. And what we can say is, I'm going to so limit myself mentally that I don't do anything negative. I mean, all I watch is Jesus TV and listen to Christian radio and sing Christian songs, and the Christian culture's been there. And if that's your thing, great. I'm not here to criticize that. There's that, though I might have just said two things. There's another path. And I think this is the one that parents are constantly trying to help their kids with. Because the other path is we can just be naive. We can take the permissive path. We can believe that what we listen to and what we read and what we take in mentally has no effect upon our mental status. And I think the one that the Bible repeatedly calls us to is the third way. It's the way of moderation. It's the way that goes, I can have Lay's potato chips. I enjoy them. But I can't have them with every meal. Like, I can enjoy some stuff that I know is junk food. I can enjoy some stuff that I know is an empty calorie. I can enjoy some stuff that's maybe even a little bit detrimental, which gets a little weird, and I realize that we can create some categorical problems, because I think no one's saying that if you struggle with alcohol, like, drink alcohol because you can have a little bit of it, and no one's saying like watch pornography because a little bit of everything is okay. Like, no, okay, so we could get ridiculous here, right? I guess I just want to create that visual for you, because I think if it's true that what we take in affects our mental status, then wouldn't it make sense that God would call us to a path of moderation? And thus, really the question would become, what do I need to filter? And this is personal, this is you, and this is where last service felt really clinical to me, because I can't tell you what you need to filter. All I can do is suggest some ideas, some maybe common stuff. One of them, and Tim Sanders talks a lot about this in this book, is the news. I don't care what your political affiliation is, whether it's Fox News or CNN, and you're someone that believes that like they're at war with each other. Well, they kind of are at war with each other. I don't care whatever. The fact of the matter is that there's study after study done, we can point you to this if you want it, that says you can't have good mental health and consume the news like popcorn. You can't do it. Now, none of us wants to be naive to world events, but I'd challenge you. Like, if you're someone that takes in talk radio all day long, if you're someone that watches 3 hours of the news and the first thing you do is read the newspaper, the experts would say, good luck having a good attitude with that. Because it's not designed to preach optimism. It's designed to teach misery. Maybe one of the things you need to filter is a lot of your news intake, and realize that you tell yourself you click on CNN, or you tell yourself you watch Fox News because you want to be informed, when in fact you have a mental addiction and it's the equivalent of junk food. Just a challenge. I think the other one involves our internet and the way we use technology in general. You can sit down at the computer, and I know the feeling because I do it, because especially with sports, and you go like, I just want to read something interesting, right? And you think it's like a drug, because you think the next website is going to fulfill the desire. And I'm talking about pretty neutral stuff here, right? Like the Denver Broncos in Google News, there's no good news, right? Now Tebow plays, and now there's like all kinds of good and bad news, and no one knows what to think. You can do that for 2 hours. And in the end, it's just like a drug, because you're no more satisfied than when you started. Maybe one of the things to filter for you, one of the ideas I heard is don't ever sit down in front of your computer without a to-do list. Like, don't let yourself just plop down. Just like we understand to sit down in front of the TV with no mission and a remote control and 700 channels, well, welcome to tomorrow, right? And you'll be more miserable tomorrow than you will be today. The same thing's true of the internet. And same with email. Seth Godin one time challenged, in a book that I read, challenged me. He said, close your inbox. Like, schedule checking your email like you would schedule doing most of the other things you do at work or at home. Like, it doesn't have to be there. It doesn't get to interrupt you all the time. Because what is it? It becomes the quick thing that gets our attention and costs us the ability to think bigger and broader and more futuristic. So there's some ideas on filtering. And then there's these ideas on adding. First one, maybe you're in a sector where the language is best practices. There's no denying that best practices when it comes to creativity, when it comes to having good ideas, when it comes to someone who is in a field, whether your field is the church or government or whatever your field is, there's no denying that the most creative, most successful, most impacting people in their field are people who get up in the morning and they don't turn on the Today Show and they don't turn on Rush Limbaugh, they read. In fact, the research that Tim Sanders talks about is they read for a half an hour. Like, people who are most driven, most energetic, most like annoying, always have ideas, drive you crazy. They're people who they get up in the morning and they understand that their mind has an appetite, and just like we understand that you might not have to eat breakfast before you go to work because you're not hungry, that's really not the point. The point is to set the pace for your metabolism, and to set the pace with your brain mentally involves reading something stimulating. Of course, as Christ followers, we see thousands of years of tradition of talking about reading and meditating on the scriptures. But I would say, take permission to not just read that. I'd say in half my quiet times right now, I'm reading a biography about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And it's been a big step for me to go like, okay, God, you're with me, right? Like, I'm not reading the Bible. My challenge to you is become a reader. And probably you're like me. You're more a reader in your head than you actually are. Like, it's something we aspire to more often than we do. Become a reader. That old statement, readers lead and leaders read. The other one is, I think, especially in the world that we live in, there's these things called podcasts. And if you're someone that sits at a computer and you're bored stiff, and you're kind of like, I do data entry, Adam. Like, how do I feed my mind? I have several friends who work in several different sectors that they've figured out that they can listen to podcasts and they can get their work done and they can stimulate their brain that way. In fact, I emailed a few of those friends this week, and we together put together this list of 9 podcasts that we all listen to. Some of them are Christ followers, some of them aren't. Some of them involve sermons. Many of them don't. You can grab that after the service if you're interested. I think it goes a long ways. And there's these age-old things like verse memorization. You get the point. I guess, in my view, if we're going to start a conversation about, okay, help me with my attitude, we have to come to the realization of what we feed our mind matters. Tim tells the story of in the book, he tells the story of a friend of his that back when they were in college and then first getting started in business, he was super energetic. He had all these great ideas. He was gung-ho. And then several years later, he called Tim and said, like, what happened? And he was just kind of talking about how bad his marriage was and how unhappy he was in his job and how much he hated his kids and how miserable he was with his car, and just kind of like, a big cry story. Tim's question to him was, what are you not doing today that you used to do 3 years ago? I think it's a brilliant question. And I think when we get to the bottom of that, it involves the way we feed our minds. That's my challenge to you, and to really take Paul's advice there. Now, if you're not a Christ follower, if you're someone that's still trying to figure out Jesus and the gospel, I think this morning is a really fun opportunity to consider the life he calls us to, because certainly he calls us to relationship with himself through the cross. That we don't save ourselves by having a positive mind, and that we're saved when we accept his forgiveness and repent of our sins and acknowledge our brokenness when we're convicted of sin and seek Jesus to alleviate us of that conviction, knowing that he forgave us. But it's also a reminder that God wants to partner with you. That he's not in the game of taking captive your body and doing things in the spiritual transformation process that you're not willing to put in any effort. It's this collaborative thing that God begs you to join him in. So let me pray and close this up, and we'll call it a morning. God, this mind stuff in some ways is clinical, and for some of us I suspect it's just a good reminder, and for others maybe it's way outside the box. I guess, God, my hope for us as a community that wants to impact our greater community is that, like the people from Narrate are the ones that sit in the 3 o'clock meeting and have better ideas than everyone else. That we're the people in the office who are dwelling on what we can do, not what we can't. That we're the people in our kids' schools and in conversations that constantly turn the conversation to things that we can control and things that are worth talking about, not the stuff that's not. God, would you make us a people that are disciplined in the way that we feed our minds? We're grateful for that, and thanks for our minds. Would you lead us and help us personalize this as we wrestle this through in our own lives? Amen.